So when you come across a dragon book that Anne McCaffrey had nothing but praise for, that's when you know you've got something good. So this is a book that's been going around on BookTube, and I like dragon fiction, and a lot of the reviews I was hearing about sounded like this would be something I would enjoy, so I decided to pick it up. So this is a fantasy historical reimagining of the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons. Now, historical retellings, historical reimaginings, this is an exceptionally difficult genre to write in, because when you change something in the real world historically, you're going to have so many ripple effects and so many unintended consequences that you're bound to get plot holes. So it's very difficult to do this in a way that feels like it could happen. But this is one of those books where it felt like it could happen. Naomi Novik did a fantastic job of working with the personalities of the different nations involved and how the dragons would factor in as biological creatures. So each country had their own focus on their dragon breeding program, and they, just like, dogs can be selected for different traits so that you can get a Chihuahua and a Great Dane and they're both a dog. The dragons were specially bred to have different traits specific to the strategies that the different nations wanted to employ. This resulted in ultimately a pretty good feeling of balance between the nations, so it didn't feel out of place. There wasn't a clear dominance where the dragons were involved. Every country, it was basically like another military branch, essentially, and it was all more or less balanced. Now, this isn't your typical dragon rider scenario. Each dragon is enormous. They have crews. They have a rider that is the captain, but they also have a crew. It's not just one dragon handler. It's basically, these dragons are air naval ships. The language used in the book, just the writing style, feels very authentic to the time period, the Napoleonic time period, and that gives a lot of atmosphere to the book that I really enjoyed. Now, the basic setup here is that Lawrence, the protagonist, he is the captain of a British Navy ship. And through a brief series of events, he captures an enemy ship that has a dragon egg, an unhatched dragon egg, as its cargo. Now, they notice that the dragon egg shell has hardened considerably, and that indicates that it is about to hatch. It is critical to have a rider available to bond with the newly hatched dragon as soon as it hatches. Otherwise, the dragon is prone to going feral and can only be used in breeding programs. And since they're in the middle of a pretty critical war, every dragon counts. So Lawrence recruits one of the young boys who was hired as a hand. He doesn't have any training on how to deal with dragons, but he's about the right age. And when the dragon hatches, they present the young boy in hopes that the dragon will bond with it and they'll be able to use the dragon in the war.
He said it seemed to be a good idea at the time.
Now, dragon riders get a bad rep because of the demands of their job. They do not marry, they're somewhat eschewed from society, there's not a whole lot really known about them, but they're kind of considered halfway wild men. So when the dragon rejects the young boy and instead chooses to bond with Lawrence himself, he's not too happy about this. However, he has a very strong sense of duty, and he decides to make the best of it and do the best he can with the situation he's been given. Most of the book focuses on the growing relationship between Lawrence and Temeraire, the dragon, and it's really more of a friendship romance. It's more of a bromance than an actual action-adventure book. But if you like that sort of thing, then it really is wonderful. The only major issue I had is I felt that at some point in the book, and I won't say exactly where, but at some point in the book, I feel like character was sacrificed for plot. There's a point in the book where it doesn't make sense for Temeraire to continue fighting in this war. Temeraire is an exceptionally intelligent dragon, and he is closely bonded with Lawrence, and it makes a lot of sense that he's going to engage in the military training and he's going to go into battle and do all these things early on because of his connection with Lawrence, and because Lawrence is pushing this. Lawrence is very duty bound. He wants to serve his country. So Temeraire asks a lot of philosophical questions, and at several points it's tied into the fairly recent historical event of those traitorous colonists that, did their thing. Oh, now that I can agree with, Temeraire said. Some of the laws which I have heard make very little sense, and I do not know that I would obey them if I were not obliged to you. It seems to me that if you wish to apply laws to us, it were only reasonable to consult us on them, and from what you have read to me about Parliament, I do not think any dragons are invited to go there. Next you will cry out against taxation without representation, and throw a basket of tea into the harbor, Lawrence said. So these are the sorts of questions and the sorts of conversations that Temeraire is initiating. Now, at one point, the consequences of what it means to be on the losing side of this war as a dragon is made abundantly clear to Temeraire. It's put right there in front of him. And considering he's made several references in the past to, this isn't really the dragon's fight, this is kind of your human deal. At this point, I was expecting Temeraire to reject the idea of participating in this war, regardless of his loyalty to Lawrence. But that was just sort of brushed over, and it felt very out of character to me. For a large part of the book, I was also having some difficulty with the actual biology of the dragons. I do have a biology degree, and so my nerd is going to come out here. But at the very end of the book, the author was kind enough to tack on some scientific papers written by one of the characters in the book that just made the nerd in me squeal in delight. There was some fun playing with gender expectations in this time period. Lawrence has to deal with some female co-workers, some female captains in the dragon naval situation, because there are certain dragon species that will only accept female handlers because they're sexist. I don't know. Bless their hearts. So we have a little pocket of gender professional equality in a time period where that didn't exist in the military. And Lawrence, coming from sort of this outside world that doesn't really know very much about the dragon captain experience, and he's kind of catching up. It's done in a very endearing way. He's trying so hard. And it just, just funny, awkward situations, which was a lot of fun to read. My only other critique in the book, there was a lot of talk of strategy of the air battles and how they were going to do this and the strategies they were going to employ in this, and that's fantastic. But there were guns used from the crew, and it was made clear that dragons are susceptible to gunfire. They are wounded heavily from gunfire. But at no point was a sniper put on a dragon whose sole job was to try and take down the other dragons in the air battle. Guns were really only used on the humans, human fighting, and not on the dragon. It didn't make a lot of sense. If you have this weapon, and sniper rifles were used as early as the Revolutionary War, and God knows that's been referenced in this book, so they got sniper rifles. Why are they not employing this on the dragons themselves? For a book that spent as much time talking about strategy as they did, it seemed like a blind spot that they wouldn't be using snipers against the dragons themselves. But yeah, this one was a lot of fun. I gave this one 4 stars, highly recommended if any of that sounds interesting to you. That's it from me today. Talk to me in the comments. Have you read His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik? And if not, do you want to read it now? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear from you. So until then, bye-bye. So Temeraire asks a lot of physiological questions. Drafted into the dragon program, or gets, joins the dragon, working with. It's not showing up for me.